Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining us from today. My name's Sarah and I am the Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to a Microsoft Reactor Sydney live stream event. Today I would like to welcome back Matt Allington. Matt is a Microsoft MVP and a career expert in BI and Excel and has more than 35 years experience in using data to deliver business value. Matt specialises in Power BI, Power Query,
Sorry,
and
that's
Power
me,
Pivot
Sarah.
for Excel. In today's session, we will cover the basics of Power Query and how it is used in Power BI, and Matt will demonstrate how you can use Power Query in Excel to solve everyday problems. So this session will be approximately 60 minutes with about 10 of those at the end for questions. However, do send us your questions throughout in the Q&A, and between Matt and myself, we'll try and answer as many as possible. And at the conclusion of today's session, we'll also share with you a link to the survey in the Q&A, and we'll also post this one to YouTube in the next 24 to 48 hours. So there will be an on-demand version, and we'll share with you the link to our YouTube channel at the end of the session as well. And please also see there we've added into the Q&A our check-in link, so you can access the resources from today's event through that one as well. Ensure that you enter in that event code there as well, which is 13200. But for now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to Matt to begin. So Matt, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Sarah. And welcome to all of those that have joined and from all around the world. It's actually very cold here in Sydney. We're coming into winter. If you are calling in from another part of the world, of course, you're probably coming into summer. We're coming into winter. So a very chilly day here, but glad you could join us. So the topic of my talk today is Power Query, the best Excel tool you don't know about. And let me jump into that and talk a little bit about that. Sarah's already given a brief introduction to me, so just a couple of points that I do have a blog that if you're interested to learn more about some of these tools, I share a lot of stuff for free on my website, and yeah, this is the book that I authored. I've actually written this book about the DAX language, which is used in Excel and Power BI, and I've just updated that for the 3rd edition. All right, so let's talk about the topic for today, which is Power Query. And I'm going to start off with an introduction to Power Query just to give you a very high level overview of what it's about. But most of the session today is going to be demos. So I just want to show you how the tool is used and give you some hands-on demonstrations so you get a sense for how easy the tool is and the capabilities of the tool. Now, hopefully and presumably, based on the topic of this course, of this session, you're joining because you don't know a lot about Power Query already. I'm assuming that most of you would be in the fairly early stages of understanding. So here are my demos, and I'll talk about each one of these demos before I kick off, and then yeah, you'll get a good sense from there. So maybe just a slide on an introduction to Power Query. So Power Query is a lot of things. It's actually what I believe to be the best Excel tool that most people don't know about. And the reason I use this, this language, I actually train people on how to use Power BI and Power Pivot, and often, in fact, regularly, when I have courses and groups of people that I'm training, I say to them, who's heard of Power Query? And consistently over the last 6 years, there's never been more than about 5% of the class that actually knows about Power Query. So 15% is the number. So this tool is available, but most people don't know about it. So it is about 10 years old. It might just be a little bit less than that. Maybe it's 9 years old. But the point is, this did not get developed last year. This is quite a mature product. And it's hidden in the Excel menu. So if you come into Excel and come up to the data tab here, this is Power Query, but nowhere will you see the word Power Query written. And in my view, that makes discoverability a bit of a challenge, but you're here today, and so you're discovering all about it today. Now, Power Query is actually, and also it's an ETL tool. So it's a tool used for data management, data loading, data manipulation. So that's its core purpose. It comes bundled with Excel, as I just showed you, but also with Power BI Desktop, and all the Power BI online tools. And there are some other online tools. So increasingly Power Query is becoming an online tool. So it's available, for example, with a product called Data Flows, which is a subset of Power BI. The software is relatively easy to use. It's got a great user interface, and that means that it's very user-friendly, accessible to people who have an Excel background. You certainly don't need a university IT degree to be able to use this tool. Power Query is deliberately a repeatable process tool. So the tool allows you to record process steps, if you like. It's like a recipe. When you're doing some cooking, you get out your recipe book and you follow the method in the recipe, the step-by-step instructions. And that's basically what Power Query is. It's like the method in a recipe. It's the step-by-step instructions. And as a result of that, once you record the instructions, it's completely repeatable. And it has a lot of depth. I mean, this is a very powerful tool. It can be used fairly superficially, if you like, but you can really get under the hood and do all sorts of very complex data manipulation process steps, depending on what it is that you need. So look, that's it for the intro. I think the best way to get to know this tool is to let me do some demos for you. So here's the first demo. This is a demo of data collection. And in this case, my use case here is, let's say we've got different departments, and in this case, it's going to be business units that are in different states of Australia, New South Wales, Victoria. And I'm doing the budget for next year, and I'm asking the department managers or the state managers to give me their forecast for their budget spend for the coming year. Now, the thing about this approach is that humans like to lay out their data in a certain way. So you can see in the sample spreadsheet that I've got here, I might have the account name down one column, and across the top I've got the names of the months. And so this is a great process for humans, but unfortunately when you go to consolidate the data and do reporting on it, this format is not ideal. And so therefore what I really want to do is I want to manipulate the data and load it like the table on the right. But I want the best of both worlds. I want it easy for the humans, and I also want it easy for reporting and analysis. So, and so the way I would normally do this is that we create multiple files, one for every user, which is a state in this case. And then we're going to use Power Query to consolidate the files and restructure it, and then we can build the reporting that we need. So that's the outline. So let me jump into the demo. Now I've got some sample data here. So I've got 3 files, one for the three major states in Australia, the 3 largest states. And if I open one of these files, just to give you a sense of what's in there, it's pretty much like I showed you on the slide. And so we've got a table containing the data, and this is very easy for a user to come in and add a number. You could save these files on a shared network folder, or you could save them in SharePoint or OneDrive, somewhere centrally available. And because we've basically got one file per person, there's no file conflicts that are going to occur. So, you know, one manager could take the file offline, do some work, and then copy the file back onto the folder. And once it's here, we can consolidate it. All right, so I'm coming over to Excel now. So I'm clicking on the data menu, and I'm going to click on Get Data. And when I do that, you'll note that there's many different data connectors. So all of these things are called data connectors. And you can see here, if I go Get Data from File, I have a choice to import data directly from a single Excel workbook, or I can import data from a SharePoint folder or from databases. In fact, there's more than 200 different data connectors that Power Query has that will allow you to easily connect to the source that you have and that you need to load. Now in this case, I'm going to go from File, and I'm not going to load from a single workbook because I have many workbooks that contain the data. So I'm going to import from a folder. And so Excel, and more specifically Power Query, will bring up this wizard, and I'm going to come down and find my sample data here. So this is the folder that contains my sample data. I click open. And then Power Query, the Power Query wizard is going to kick in, and it says, okay, well, I've had a look in that folder and I found these 3 files, and I get a number of options down here. And in this case, I want to combine the data, and I also want to make some transformations. I want to reshape the data for my needs. So I'm going to select Combine and Transform Data. So now, what happens now is that Power Query is basically launching a wizard, and this wizard is designed to help me, the end user, understand how to load this data. Now, the way to think about this wizard is Power Query is saying to me, you teach me how to process one file, and once Power Query knows how to process a single file, then it will repeat the process for every single file that it finds in the folder. So that's the basic process. And so by default, it's going to process the first file that it finds. And I've got a sheet here and also a table. In this case, both would work, but I'm going to select the budget table. I'll click OK. So Power Query analyzes that table, and it's going to do a whole lot of stuff under the hood. And in fact, you can see here, these are all queries and folders and subfolders. There was a whole lot of work that happened under the hood by Power Query, but much too detailed for today's presentation. But suffice to say that Power Query is pretty smart, and it did a whole lot of things to try and make this process of loading and shaping this data much easier for you just by clicking on the menu. So if you recall a moment ago, I said that the process step is teach Power Query to handle a single file, and once it's handled, it knows how to handle a single file, then repeat that process many times. And so this is the query that teaches Power Query how to load a single file, and then this blue one is the query that will actually then load all of the files in that folder. And so I'm going to make some changes because what's been loaded is not exactly what I want. And so in this case, I'm going to start off by clicking on my single sample file, and this is what it looks like. It's pretty much exactly as you see when I showed you before the sample file. Okay, so I'm going to, the first and most important thing here is to unpivot this data. So this data has all the months along the top as columns, and I need them in a different shape. And so I'm going to click on this account column and then right click and unpivot the other columns in this spreadsheet. And in fact, this used to be really hard to do prior to Power Query. It was a very complex task, and Power Query has made unpivoting data very easy. So pivoting data has always been easy. Unpivoting data has always been, or traditionally been, pretty hard. So this makes it pretty easy to do. And so after I unpivoted that column, what I can do is I can come over here and I can do all sorts of things. I'll leave this name account, but this is actually the month. So I'll just rename the column, and this is actually the budget. So I'll just rename that column. You may also note here that this says ABC123 and this one says ABC. This is telling me what type of data is stored in the column. And ABC123 basically says Power Query is not clear exactly what type of data is in there, but this one here, this one is text data. So I've basically reshaped the single file, and this is the way I want to load the data. But I'm now going to jump back to this other query, and I'm actually now getting an error message. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining all these error messages because it is a little bit more detailed than the scope for today. But just notice that over here, when I click on a query, I have all of these what's called applied steps. And so basically what this query is doing is that it's connecting to my folder, it's found these 3 files, it's then invoking a function and the function is what we created over here, which is the set of instructions how to process that file. And then it's doing a few other steps. It's removing the columns, and then it's expanding all the data from those 3 files that are in my folder. And in fact, if you notice down here that this column here tells me that all of this data was coming from the New South Wales file, and this data is coming from the Queensland file, and so on. And so you can see that Power Query has automatically combined that data for me. Now, I want to do a couple of other things on this file. So what I'm going to do, I really want to extract the name of the state from this file. And I also want to consolidate the year with the month so that I can create basically the first day of the month. And so I'm going to use some of Power Query's transformation capabilities. So I'll click on this column and I'll go transform and replace values. And basically I want to get rid of this .xlsx. I don't need that. That's the file extension, of course. So I'm going to look for that .xlsx and I'm going to replace it with nothing. And then I'll just click OK. And then that basically Power Query goes through that column and extracts and removes that piece of the file name. And so now I've just got the state and the year. I can do another transformation. So transform, and I'm going to split this column based on a delimiter. And Power Query automatically is smart enough to realize that there's a space delimiter. So I'm going to split this column into 2, and then I'm going to rename the column. So this is the state, and this is the year. And now that I've done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically join the month and year together. So I'm going to now merge those 2 columns together. So I'll click on those 2 columns and I'll do a transformation. I'm going to merge the columns. I'll use a dash as a separator, and this will become my date, which is effectively going to be the first day of the month. And in fact, after I made that change, you'll see here that this still says ABC, which is telling me that Power Query recognizes this as text, but I'm going to explicitly tell Power Query that this is a date. And when I do this, it does the transformation. So this is the international date format for those dialing in from the US. So you can see 1st of February, 1st of March, and so on. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the data type in these 2 columns. I'll just do an automatic detection, and that's pretty much good to go. So this is now this is going to be my budget data. I'm going to give the query a new name, and I'll just go File, Close and Load. And I'm out of Power Query now, and over here on the right hand side, this is what we call the Queries and Connections pane. You can access that from Data, Queries and Connections. And at this stage, nothing is loaded, but I'm going to right click and load this query into a table. And I'll just put that into a table there. And so now you can see I've got the data loaded. When it's in this format, I can click in this table, I can insert a pivot table. If I want, there's all sorts of things that I can do. So I could come here and bring, say, the state, the account, and the budget. So now I've got a summary level data for everything that's been loaded. And then, the point being that the data is now loaded, which is really useful for analysis. So if I was responsible for gathering this data from my cost center managers and then aggregating and reporting on the total budget for the entire business, then this would be relatively easy to do. So there's 1.34 million coming in from those files. Now, one of the super duper features of Power Query is that at some point in time, the data changes. And so, here's another file. This is the Tasmanian data, another state in Australia. And I'm going to take this file and drop it into my budget folder. And so now I've got 4 files in this folder rather than 3. And when you have a change in the source data, it's just a matter of coming in here and clicking the refresh button. And I'll try it one more time. And when I click refresh, notice now that the new data that was placed in that folder automatically gets refreshed. I don't have to go back into Power Query. I just hit that refresh button. And so this is the repeatability process of Power Query. And this is what makes it such a powerful tool. Okay, so let me jump back to my slides and let's talk about that. So that was the first demo where we allow people to collect data in one format and then combine it and consolidate it and present it in a second format. Okay, so the second demo I'm going to use to show you here is how you can use Power Query as an auditing tool. And the use case I'm going to show you here for this demo is what I would call accounts receivable and remittance advices. So basically what's happening is, imagine that I'm a business, I have invoices, I send a list of invoices to my customer, and my customer pays one or more of those invoices and sends me a remittance advice. And so basically the customer tells me what they've paid and they give me the invoice by invoice detail. Now my job is to find out which ones did they pay, which ones didn't they pay, which ones did they overpay, which ones did they short pay. And this is quite a time-consuming task if you don't have a tool like this. And so I'm going to show you with a demo how I could automate that process. All right, so let me jump back to my sample data, and I have 2 files here. So this is my accounts receivable list. I'll just open this one so that you get a sense of what this file is like. So it's just a simple spreadsheet. It's got a customer number. In this case, the customer may have multiple customer numbers. The date of the invoice, a unique invoice number, and how much am I expecting them to pay for that invoice. So it's like a summary invoice at this point in time. So let me close that down and fire up Power Query. And so I'll go to a new workbook. And once again, data, get data. And this time I am going to load my data from a particular file because there's a single file that contains the accounts receivable. So I'm going to load data from a workbook, go into my folder, and first of all, I'm going to load the accounts receivable. What is it that I expect my customer to pay? Now you can see this is similar to the last time. In this case, there's no choice of file because I've already selected the accounts receivable file. I'm going to click on the first sheet and I'm once again going to transform the data. So I click transform. This is the Power Query editor that you can see here. I'm going to expand this pane on the right hand side and I'm going to rename this query. I'm just going to call this AR for accounts receivable. So at this point, I've got a query that is being created, but currently I'm not doing anything with that query. So the second thing I need to do is fetch the remittance advice. What did the customer pay? So I'm going to stay inside Power Query, right click and do a new query. And it's the same process as before. New query from file from Excel. And I'm going to load this time the remittance advice. This is sample data that I've created, of course, so it wouldn't always be as similar as this. So I'm clicking on my sheet, click OK. Does exactly the same as before. It creates a connection to the file. And here's the file, and I'm going to rename this remittance. And at this point, I've now got 2 tables of data, so 2 queries pointing to 2 source files, but at this stage, these files are not related in any way. And so the next step now is to do a comparison between the data in my accounts receivable file and the data in my remittance advice. Now in this case, my accounts receivable is effectively my book of record. So this is the one version of the truth. At the end of the day, the customer may or may not pay me, but the accounts receivable list is my proof of what it was that I asked them to pay. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new query that combines these two data sources together. So I'm going to start with this AR query, and I'm going to come up here to the home menu, and I'm going to merge queries as a new query. So I'm going to create a third query, and the wizard, this is the Power Query user interface. It's very user-friendly. It's going to help me do what I need to do. So I need to join my accounts receivable query with my remittance query, and I'm going to join them based on this unique invoice number. So I need to do a match between the invoice number in accounts receivable and the invoice number in the remittance advice. You may have done this in the past in Excel with a VLOOKUP or something like that. And you can see that Power Query says there are 2160 matches out of a total of 2,206 rows. So not all the rows match. Now I'm going to click OK. And now you see I've got a brand new query, which I'm going to call analysis. Of course, I could call it whatever I want. At this point in time, this still looks identical to my original accounts receivable, except now I've got a new column here. And what I'm going to do with this new column is I'm basically going to extract the payment information from my remittance table. So I don't need the invoice number or the invoice date from this table. I do need to know how much they paid. So I'm just going to extract that one column. And after I do that, I end up with two payment columns. This one here comes from the accounts receivable, and this one here comes from the remittance table. So before I do anything else, just for clarity, I'm going to rename this. This is the expected amount, and this one is my received amount. Now it's crystal clear to me which is which, even though they had the same name before. Now, in the interests of time, I can't go into all the detail, but I do want to point out that down here, sometimes I'm expecting some money, but the customer didn't pay anything, or it was basically missing from their file. And for reasons of just speeding up this demo process, I'm going to replace these null values with a 0. Just saying that instead of there being an absence of any data, I'm going to replace it with a 0. And also, since I clicked on this, notice how you get a whole lot of nice information about the column of data that you're loading. And so I can see here that there are 16 rows that were empty. There are quite a few unique values. Here's the maximum, here's the average. There's a whole lot of statistical data that Power Query gives you before you load your data. And so I'm going to do a transformation similar to what I did when I scraped off the XLSX portion of my file name. So I'm going to go transform, I'm going to replace, and this will operate on the entire column. I'm going to replace the null with 0. And when I do that, I've now got two columns full of values telling me how much did I expect and how much I actually received. Now, I could just stop at this point and load it into Excel, but there's actually some further things that I can do to make this a more useful tool. So I'm now going to generate a new column of data that doesn't exist in the source data. So I'm going to add a column, and this one will be a custom column. And this custom column allows me to write a formula. So this one's going to be the difference. And I'm just going to now I've got to subtract the expected amount from the received amount. Now, if they short pay it, I want it to be a negative number. So if I expect 10 and receive 8, I want a negative number. So I need the received amount subtract the expected amount. So if they short pay it, I end up with a negative number. So that's basically what I want. And you can see here that many of these columns have been paid, but some of them have been paid short. In fact, I could once again just load this data, but I'm going to go to one more step. I might just change this data type to decimal number. I'm going to add another column which gives me a summary of what has happened for this invoice. So I'll add a conditional column, and I'm going to call this the status. So the status will be if the difference is equal to 0, then it's paid in full. And I can go on and add some new clauses. So I can say if the difference is less than 0, then it's short paid. And I can also say if the difference is greater than 0, then it's overpaid. I guess that doesn't happen too often. So really, they're the three use cases. So I'll click OK. And so now I've got a nice column that allows me to categorize the data, and I can see this one's short paid, this one's paid in full. And in fact, I've actually made perhaps a logic error here, because this one technically is short paid. Technically it's correct, but they actually paid 0. And so perhaps a more granular description in this case is that this one is not paid as opposed to short paid. This one's short paid, right? They paid some amount, but it wasn't the full amount. This one actually hasn't been paid. And so one of the features of Power Query is that it records all these steps. So you can go back through the process and find out what's happened in the previous steps. And anywhere that you have a cog, you're able to re-enter that step and make a change. So I'm going to click on the cog, and I'm going to make a change to say I need a new clause that if the received amount is equal to 0, then it's not paid. Right, so that's a new piece of information. However, these rules are executed in the order they appear on the screen. And so what will happen here is that this short paid step will get executed before this not paid step. And as a result of that, the not paid step will never get executed, because if it's not paid, it's also short paid. So what I need to do is I need to move this up. So I need to check if it's not paid first, and then I can go ahead and see if it's short paid or overpaid. And so I'll go ahead and do that. And now you can see that this one is not paid and this one is short paid. And I should always set the data type before loading. And I need to do that. I already did that before. Okay, so now I'm going to go File, Close and Load. By default, the way Power Query in Excel works is it won't load your data unless you ask it to. And so now I'm coming on to right click and I'll say load this to a table in Excel. And now I've got this nice formatted table, and I could click in that table, perhaps put a slicer on the status column. And now I've got a really nice usable report. If I'm in charge of these accounts receivable, I can easily click here on my table, show me the short paid, show me the not paid, and it gives me a tool that I can use to do further investigation with the customer. Next month, when the new accounts receivable and the new remittance advice come out, all I have to do is replace these two files with the new versions of the files, keeping the same name, and then I just hit refresh and we're good to go again for the next month. So repeatable process steps. Okay, just doing a time check. So I think we're going okay. Let me go on to the third example. And in this example, I'm going to show you how you can use Power Query to extract some data from a PDF document. And this often happens, somebody sends you some data, it's in a tabular format inside a PDF, but you want it in Excel because you want to do some analysis on that data. Of course, you could try cutting and pasting it, but it's a bit clunky, and frankly, Power Query is just a better way to solve that problem. So what I've done is I found a PDF online. This is an old one that I had from a few years ago, and it's showing me the water storage levels for the various dams that exist in the Sydney region, and it tells me how much, what's the full capacity and what's the usage over the last week. And I basically want to extract that data and put it into a table so that I could use it for my own purposes. So basically I'm going to turn this table on the left, which is a PDF, into this table on the right. So let me start by showing you the PDF. Now, one thing to note is that this only works with PDF documents that were printed using a PDF creator or using a print to PDF document. This process will not work with a scanned PDF. You can't scan it through your computer and expect this to work. The best way to tell is if you can highlight text like this, then the extract from PDF feature will work. And there's a few tables in this PDF document, just take note. So there's a table here, there's another one here, another one here. And so this process only works with tabular data. So Power Query is optimized to work with tabular data, where you have rows and columns in a table structure. So this is the table that I want to load from this PDF, and notice that it's got the full storage. So what's the full capacity? It also tells me the change versus last week. So this is down 760 megalitres, but it doesn't tell me the percentage change for last week. It does tell me the percentage of capacity, but it doesn't tell me the percentage change. And I'm going to go ahead and do that calculation. All right, so let's create a new workbook. So File, New. And I'm going to go to Data, Get Data from File, and this time I'm going to select the PDF connector. So from PDF, I'll navigate to my file and connect. Power Query does a preview load of the PDF, and it presents to you the tables that Power Query found within the file. And these tables may or may not be what you were looking for. So this one here was a table somewhere. This is not what I'm after. So in this process, what you need to do is you just need to step through these tables and try and find the one that you're looking for. And so it helps to have a good sense of the data. So physically have a look at the PDF first before you come into Power Query. So this looks like what I want, but notice there's only 3, 6, 7 dams. So there must be something a little bit different. And then here we've got 3, 6, 9. So this is the full list of all the dams. So this is the one that I'm going to load. So I'll go Transform Data. And Power Query kicks in, it analyzes the file, and it presents to me the data that it found. Now, as you can see, this is actually pretty messy, and I don't want all of this. I just want the information that's basically in these rows. Also take note that there's a few steps that were automatically generated here. I connected to the source, I navigated to page 2, and then Power Query automatically promoted the headers for me, which is not what I want, and also changed the data types. So anytime Power Query does something that you don't want, you just delete those steps. So I'm just going to delete. This also applies if you make a mistake, just click delete. Okay, so now I've got the raw data. Now, the process that you follow now really depends on what you're trying to do, but I just like to look at this table and say, let's get rid of the stuff that I don't want. So the first thing that I don't want is anything that's got null in this column. So I can come up here and say, don't give me the nulls. And it basically filters every row that has a null in that first column. And in fact, I don't want the storage and I don't want the total. So I'm just going to go back and remove those as well. So storage and total. So really with 3 or 4 clicks, I've been able to get rid of the data, most of the data that I don't need. Now, as far as the columns, I do want that this is the name of the dam. This one is the maximum capacity. I'm just control clicking here. And the other piece I wanted, which was this one here, this one tells me the change versus last week. And I don't want any of these other columns. So I'm just going to right click and remove the other columns. And so once again, very quickly, I'm getting close to what I need. So this is the name of the dam, and this is the full capacity, and this is the weekly use. And there's the 3 columns, but notice that there's something's going on here. It's got the word image. Now this sometimes happens in your source data. Doesn't matter whether it's a PDF or any source for that matter. Sometimes your data is a bit dirty and it needs to be cleaned. And so I actually need to get rid of this word image. Otherwise, if I try and change this to say a whole number, I guess, notice I get an error. So I need to fix this. So I'm going to go back, and what I'm going to do is I'm clicking in this cell, and down the bottom, this tells me exactly what is in that cell. And so I'm going to highlight this image piece, copy it, Control C, come back to this column, transform, replace values. I want to find that image and replace it with nothing, and click OK. And so now I've been able to clean that column, and once I've done that, I multi-select and detect my data types, and it's smart enough to go ahead and do that conversion and actually turn the text, including commas, into actual numbers. I'm going to do the same trick as before, so I'm going to replace my null with 0. If I don't do this, then the next step where I do a mathematical calculation is going to fail. And remember, the last thing I want to do is what is the percentage change? Now this doesn't have a percentage change in the data. I could load it and do it in Excel, but it's actually much easier and much better to do it here inside Power Query. So I'm going to add a column, a custom column, and this will just be the weekly use divided by the capacity, and this will be the percent weekly use. And I can go ahead and format that as a percentage. And finally, I'll make a decision. I'm going to load this one into a table. And there's my data. I do need to come in here and format it once again inside Excel. Okay, so a nice demonstration of how you can extract data from a PDF document if you need to use that. All right, so look, it's 1:45 and I do have one more demo. I will go through this pretty quickly because I just want to show you how it works, and it'll probably leave about 5 or 7 minutes left for questions. And so in this case, I'm going, whoops, wrong one. Sorry, this is the right one, but I'm sorry, I didn't change the header. So this one is the web extraction. And I'm going to go to a web page and I'm going to extract some data from a website, and I'm going to restructure that using Power Query so that I can do some analysis. So here's my web page. This is a website, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I'm going to have a look down this page. You can see that it's got some tabular data, very similar to the PDF example. And I want to extract this data here, which tells me the population by state in Australia over the last sort of 50 or 60 years or thereabouts. So what I'd like to do when extracting data from a web page is to come up, find the page, find the data, then copy the URL, Control C, and then I will come in and do a new workbook, back into Power Query, data from web. This is one of the 200 connectors. I'll paste my address, click OK. You'll start to see that these wizards look very similar, whether you're using a PDF or an Excel document, or in this case from web. And I can just sort of go through these tables. This is the one, I know this is the one, so I'm going to jump straight to this table and I'll transform. And it's pretty much the same as before. You're presented with the table as it exists in the source, but you get the opportunity to manipulate that data so that you only load what you need. And I'll go through this sort of reasonably quickly, but I want to get rid of these bottom 4 rows. So there's a menu option for that. I can remove bottom rows. It'll ask me how many do I want to remove. In this case, it's 4. Now, I need to get the state information into the column headings, but I have an extra column, or sorry, an extra row of data that I don't need. So this one's a little bit more complex. I need to remove top rows 1. And whoops, that was a mistake. So I can delete it if I make a mistake. I said keep instead of remove. So let me try again. Remove top rows 1. You can see it's good because if you make a mistake, just go back. And then I can use the first row as a header. So just with maybe half a dozen clicks, I've been able to get this data close to what I want. I now want to get rid of the top row again. So remove top rows 1. This is an important principle, is that the steps get executed in order. So if you know, whatever process you execute will be repeated in the same order when you automate that process down the track. I'm going to jump across here, get rid of my total for Australia. So just remove that column, right click, remove. And I'm now left with the population in each of the states. But this format, once again, is not very user-friendly. It is user-friendly. It's just not good for analysis purposes. I might just call this year. So I'm going to unpivot the other columns. And when I do that, I get a state column and a population column. Now, at this point, you might notice that population is still reading ABC, and you could probably gather that this is text, not numbers. And so I actually need to transform this into whole numbers. But when I do that, I get these errors. And the reason I get the errors is because of the space existing in some of these numbers. This website uses a space as a proxy for the 1000 separator. And so I can't do that. What I need to do is clean the data once again. Click on the column, transform, replace values, find the space, not the B, find the space and replace it with nothing. Click OK. And then I can convert it into a whole number. And lastly, I need to scale this data up because the data on the website is in thousands. So I'm going to multiply this column by 1000, and that will take it up to the true population, which was 3.8 million. And I'll just go File, Close and Load to. I think I did that right. And I'll load it to a table. And I think I hit the wrong button when I did that, but let me see if I can find that again. Let's go load to table. Okay, and there we have the population. And once it's in this format, you can use any of the Excel tools. I could quickly throw in a chart, and I'll put a filter on one of the states, so New South Wales. oops, here's my chart. And so now I've got a nice chart that I've been able to produce off of that data that exists on the website. And at any time I can just hit refresh on this query. If the website is updated, then the new data will be loaded into your report. And so that process of manually having to keep the website and your report in sync no longer exists because it's an automated process. Okay, so that's it. So right on time for my demo. I'm sorry, I realized that last one was a little bit fast paced, but the objective of the session is to create awareness of what these tools can do. It's not really designed to teach you how to do things. I'd be happy to take any questions. Just one point here. I do have a website with a colleague of mine, Ken Pools, called skillwave.training. We do have a training course on this website called Power Query Fundamentals. It's a free course. It will give you some more foundation information about Power Query. We also have paid courses on that website, but if you'd like to learn more, feel free. You can scan this QR code or you can go to that URL that I've provided there and have a look at that free course as a way of moving your knowledge further. So with that, I might jump back to Sarah and see whether we have any questions.
Thanks, Matt. We haven't actually had any questions come through just yet. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I will just share my screen just with all the links to remind people from today, which I've already added into that chat section there. Okay, so you'll see there we've got our check-in link with the event code. If you have time to check in today, you'll receive some extra event resources there. And also just a link to our survey if you have a couple of minutes to do that one. Also the same event code for that one. And then there's the Reactor Sydney meetup page where you'll see all of our upcoming events. And also the YouTube channel. So we had a couple of times people ask us if this one will be recorded, and yes, it will, and uploaded to YouTube within the next 24 to 48 hours. So if there's anything that you missed from today's session, you'll be able to see that on the YouTube channel with the link there, which I've added into the Q&A. We've had a couple of questions come through.
Yep, I can see them there. So let me jump in.
Great.
Let me jump into those just in the order that they came in. So I think the first one was the one, can Power Query take large data into a data model? And can that data be pivoted and use calculated fields? So the short answer is yes. I did focus just on Power Query in this case, but Power Query is a tool that can be used for Power Pivot for Excel. So this is Power Pivot for Excel. So when the question referred to the data model, this is what it refers to, but it also refers to Power BI, which has the same technology. One of the benefits of loading to the data model is you can load a lot of data. So Excel has a 1 million row limit. You can't load more than 1 million rows into an Excel file, but you certainly can into Power Pivot for Excel. So I can go data. I wonder, I'll just see if I've got my SQL Server going here. So I have SQL Server on my PC, and if I just try and see what I can find here. So this is another quick demo. I didn't prepare this, but
share your screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Thanks for letting me know.
That's okay.
I forgot you were sharing. Okay, so let's try again. So I'm connecting to my database. I actually don't have the database that I was hoping for, actually. So I'm trying to see if I can find a sales table. Sales, don't really know this data. Let me pull this one in. Transform data. I don't know how many files are in, or how many rows are in this table, but I will connect to it. So I'm not going to do any transformation in this case. But let's just go, in actual fact, before I move on, I might answer the second question, which I think was, how do you get this distribution list? And so to do this, this is a feature which is off by default. So you come up to the view menu, and these are the features here: column quality, column profile, column distribution. And so column profile, when I select on a column, you get all these stats and you get a nice histogram here. Column quality, this tells me this stuff at the top here. And column distribution will give me a little baby histogram for each of the columns. The reason they're off by default is because they do use a bit of processing power, and so they turn them off, but that's where you turn them on. So if I come here and I'll do close and load to, so this is the key that I didn't show you before. Instead of loading them to a table in Excel, I'm going to select only create a connection and add it to the data model. And when I do that, it gets loaded into Power Pivot for Excel. So this is the data modeling tool. This is a huge topic in its own right. There's 121,000 rows that have been loaded. And once I've done that, yes, I can start building a pivot table that uses that data. This is a little bit off topic, but I could, for example, by product ID and quantity, I could do a simple sum. And then, yes, I could definitely start to write formulas. I think the questioner asked about calculated fields, but I could write a new measure, and this might be the average unit price, something like that. Average unit price is the average of the unit price column, and that's a currency 2 decimal place. And so yes, you can go ahead and then write formulas using the measure language and add that into your model. So I think that answers those 2 questions that I had. Can I ask how to add the column statistics? Okay, I think we did that one. Oh, I think there were 2 questions that came in about those statistics and distribution graphs. So I think hopefully that's answered both of those questions. So Sarah, I'll hand back to you. I don't think there's any other questions.
Great, thanks Matt. No, we haven't had any others come through. So thank you very much to everyone for asking questions and attending today. And thank you to Matt for presenting. We appreciate you joining us for a Microsoft Reactor live stream event, and have a good rest of your afternoon, evening or morning, wherever you've joined us from today. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks all, bye.